Gradients can be confusing to some students, as I've learned throughout the years teaching Illustrator, and it doesn't have to be that confusing. There's a couple things to consider, a couple tips to apply effective gradients, and in this lesson you'll learn those. Go ahead and draw out some shapes. I'm going to draw a circle here first, and let's say I'll do the stroke set to none, and then the fill, right now we just have white. And so if you want to add a gradient to this, if I choose the gradient tool here, click and drag, it does nothing, right? We need to apply a gradient. So down at the bottom where it has color, none, and then in the middle we got gradient. Go ahead and click that. That'll apply a gradient, and we've got our gradient panel. It should pop up, but if it doesn't, just go to Window and then Gradient and check it. And so right here we have white on one side, and if I click and drag it over to the right, you'll notice more of it's white there, and then it begins the gradient in the middle instead. Drag it over to the left, it puts it back. Same thing with the right-hand side, the black. And then there's a midpoint right here. You can go to the left, to the right to emphasize one or the other. Now you notice if I click down here where I hover the mouse right below it and click, that adds another slider. In between each pair of sliders, you have the midpoint slider there. You can add a couple of those. If you don't want those, just click and drag it off and it will delete those. And you can also click these and enter in specifically. Let's say you want to reset this back to 50%. You can type it in or select it there with the arrow, and then it resets it to the middle. Now, what if you want a different style? We have linear, and then there's radial, so that's a completely different type of gradient. And if we go back to linear, you have angle. You can do 120 degrees, 180, or you can type something in, a custom number. And then if you change the aspect ratio of the radial, it'll change to be different. You can do 100% as the default. So I'll go back to linear, and there's a couple presets up here. There's white, black, orange, yellow, and it shows it has 5 sliders here, and then fading sky, super soft black vignette, and so on. So what if I wanted color here? If I double click on this, it actually brings up the color options here. If you click this, it'll change it. You can choose from RGB, grayscale, HSB, CMYK, WebSafe, RGB. So my default is CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black. If yours is RGB, that's fine as well. It's just going to depend on which one you have selected. Let me pull this up here. All right, double click on it, and then we have the options here. So you can drag the sliders here to change it, or you can just click a custom color in here. I have that kind of blue there, and then over here, double click that, and let's just do a slightly different color. And then you can add a slider in the middle, add a completely different color if you want. So you're going to be thinking, well, why do we have a gradient tool here? Well, if you click and drag over here, you can actually change the distance and the angle of the gradient instead of having to rely on this. So it will change the angle right here, but you can just click and drag over the shape that the gradient's being applied to, and it will change it for us here in the gradient panel. You can hold Shift if you want it perfectly level, so it'll change it to 0 degrees, negative 90 degrees, negative 180 degrees, or 90 degrees. So if you have a couple shapes open here, it's applying that gradient we already have selected. But if I choose the gradient tool and click and drag over, it will apply it only to the one that's selected. See how this one's already selected? If I just click in the background so nothing is selected, and then I choose the gradient tool again, it's not doing anything, right? It's always going to be applying it to the one that's selected. You can also save this gradient. Let's say you have a gradient that you like. Up here at the top, you can click that, and then click this right here, add to swatches, and now I have it right there. So you can save custom swatches for later. And one more tip, you can click this, it'll reverse the gradient compared to what we have it at. So that's how you use the gradient tool in Illustrator. I will see you in the next lesson.